Okay, good morning. We are in Ayin Beis, Volume 2, top of page 1156. We're discussing the most fundamental elements of the earliest stages of the process of how God put into motion all of existence. Everything from the highest levels, which are being called here, Yesh Amiti, of course, refers to Atzmos, the creator, the true and absolute reality that is of a different type of existence than anything we can comprehend or fathom or relate to. Then there is the Yesh Anivra, the created Yesh, that is us. And then in between is this interface, this field of energy called Ayin. And that divides into two, one that is more reflective of the source and one that relates more to existence. So there's a logical progression here. As I've said many times, God was not bound to any progression or any logic, but put it in a way that both the process of creation and the process of avodah, our work of returning and retracing and reconnecting to the source, makes sense and can be internalized on the terms that we can relate to the way God put this system into place, which has to tell you that the system itself, is also divine. It's not just makes sense to us, but it's a divine system. Okay. So with that said, we've talked at length about what this ayin is, the three different interpretations. We've talked about the meaning of the word ayin, how it's seen from above and how it's seen from below. And in this mimer, we began discussing this last page, was that in the divine energy itself, you have to say these two, Das Elyon and Das Tachten, exists in the ayin itself. And we're in the middle of explaining this. As I said, there are four different ways, levels, I should say, four different efanim, be'inyan habitl of the ayin. The ayin, which is the divine energy, which is davuk, and connected and relates and connected to and completely dedicated to God's divine energy, that itself has four different ways of explaining the bittul. It's really four levels. So middle of the beginning of the first eifin, and he's calling this the bittul of heder tfisas makim. Keep that in mind, because you're going to have different names of defining each type of bit. This bittul, simply put, as he gave us several examples, is a bittul that comes from recognizing and feeling the source, or feeling that which is above you, and therefore feeling in that sense completely diminished or completely insignificant, overshadowed, or no standing compared to the level above. And as I said, just briefly, what he gave the example of Keser Elyon. Well, actually, it's not an example. Keser Elyon is Uchamhu, Kodem Ilis Ilis. That Keser, though it's a great light and a very high level, but it's dark, it's called darkness, it's darkened compared to the cause of causes that's above it, what he called the Kav. And he brought another language from Zohar, that all Kol Nurayim is Chashachoyin Kameh, that all the lights get darkened before it. That means on its own level, it's a level of light. But when you compare it, and when it stands in presence of and feels its source, it feels darkened, even though it's essentially light. But compared to higher light, it's dark. Like he compared it to Shraga B'tira, the flame in the light of the sun, in the bright sun. And then he gave the example of a cotton and a gadol. First he said a smaller person and a greater person. Later he said chacham cotton and chacham gadol. So the chacham is a chacham, but in presence of someone greater than him, he's completely bottled, completely nullified. Okay, so all this is called tfisas mokim ba'atzmei. Okay, but then comes the question now. The question is, this is fine and good when you're talking about two levels of light. So a lower level of light is considered dark in the presence of a higher level of light. Like we even see the candle, doesn't explicitly state it here, but another memoir, when you light a candle and it's a bright day, the candle not only does not give off light, it actually is darker than the daylight. So in a dark room, the candle is the savior. It illuminates the room. In a bright day, the exact opposite. The candle not only doesn't give light, it's even darker, like a shadow. It looks like a shadow. If you wouldn't know better, you wouldn't know it's light altogether. As a matter of fact, it seems to darken that area. That's fine when you're talking about two levels, where one is higher than the other. But Atzmus, this is what he said. But it comes how but how do you say that by Atzmus? Atzmus is not begeder Eir. To say that Eir is nullified in the presence and is aware of Atzmus, they're not in the same ballpark altogether, not in the same domain. That's what he asked. Like we talk about the sun, so you have the flame compared to the sun, or chacham katan, a smaller chacham compared to a greater chacham. And this is dependent that they're aware and sense that the smaller wise person, the wise person that's not of the same stature than the greater wise person, is aware of the hafla of his chachma. That means there's an awareness of that. All this is fine. Same thing, Keser Elyon, you can say. But Atzmus, how do you lamayla b'chinas gili? Atzmus is higher than gili. So where's there anything in common here that this thing on its own, it's an existence, so to speak. And in face of Atzmus, it's like it becomes nullified. So to explain this, the Rebbe Rashab, and the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to elaborate a lot more on this topic when we learn it in Sadik Daled. But for now, we're learning Ayin Beis. So he says Yesh Leimer. He explains it by explaining a unique element of Eir. And briefly, even though Eir, compared to Atzmus, is exactly like the Yesh, they're both equally infinitely distant because they're not Atzmus. Yet, the fact is, the way the Eir emanates and emerges, the way God imparts Eir is in a different way than how he imparts a Yesh. So explaining that, he says like this: the Yesh teaches us of Ein Arech Lecha Be'elam Haza. It teaches us that the Boire, the Creator, is completely beyond. Eir does not tell us that, because the Eir on its own doesn't necessarily have to come from Atzmus. Eir comes also from the sun. So Eir itself, without knowing there's a Yesh, would not tell us about the infinite distance and the magnitude of the grandeur of Atzmus itself. So yes, Eir tells us there's a source, absolutely, much more than a Yesh does, because a Yesh doesn't tell you it has a source. So Eir tells us there's a source, but it doesn't tell us what kind of source it is. Because on its own, all Eir can tell us is that the source gives off light. And yet, once we know that the Yesh was created, it informs us and tells us, oh, that means that there's a creator here. This creator is therefore beyond light and beyond no light and beyond creation, beyond everything. And yet, because Eir is still a revelatory force, it reveals, so the words he uses is that although Eir is Shalei Be'erech, but the Eifen, the Hisavas Atzmus is not in the derech of Ein Arech. In other words, because it comes in a form of revealing. It reveals. The Yesh, it's exactly the same point. The same point that said the Yesh teaches us about Atzmus also teaches us that it does not reveal Atzmus. The Yesh doesn't reveal. It's not a revealing force. It's something we deduce from seeing. Something can be created that does not indicate on a source. It must come from such a high level. The Eir is the opposite. The Eir tells us there is a source, but by doing so, the Eir itself is in a form of revealing. So when you bring both together, Eir and Yesh, you basically have the revelation of the Ein Arech of Atzmus. The yesh tells us there's an ein arech. The eir reveals it. The yesh, the eir on its own would only be a revealing. We wouldn't know how high, how much it can reveal. The yesh, the yesh basically allows the eir to teach us things that the eir itself doesn't even itself indicate on. So eir is a revealing force. That's all it is. So when you see light, when you, for example, turn on a light in a dark room, what does it do? It doesn't do anything. Nothing changes in the room, doesn't create anything. Whatever was there, the light will inform you and reveal to you. So on one hand, light doesn't have any substance of its own. The yesh would be the object in the room. So now you see an object, so you say, oh, to create this, you need to have a beira. Only only he can create. The light is neutral in the sense it reveals whatever it has to reveal. If you see Atzilus, you know the light is revealing Atzilus. So the mere fact that there's a light coming from Atzmus doesn't tell you much about Atzmus except that Atzmus is being revealed. When you see what Atzmus creates, the product of his creation, then the Eir, which is like a flashlight essentially, is shining the light. Here's a yesh. Now you know that this yesh is coming from an ein arech place, which is Atzmus. So what's the conclusion from this? That though if the pure mitzias of Eir is a mitzias of ein arech, just like the yesh, like he said, ein arech lecha, he actually used the word, Mashatzmus says these words, that mamish kamosha yeshu bein arech, kamoy ken gama Eir bein arech. Of course, because Eir is not closer to Atzmus than it is than the yesh is, and neither the other way around. On the other hand, the way Eir functions, its method is a revealing force. As such, as we're going to learn at the end of this subject, he's going to say, then you could say heder tfisas makim. Remember, the question was, Eir and Atzmus are not in the same league. It's not one light compared to another. But because light is a revealing element, so it's the revealing element of it, which is a positive thing, is going to not be teifas smokim compared to Atzmus. But I don't want to jump to that because that he's going to say at the end of this subject. He's now going to give an example to explain the difference between Eir and Yesh. Now, just for the record, when we learned this in Sadik Dalad a while back, you may remember the words were, when he came to Ruchnis and Gashmis, he said that Ruchnis and Gashmis, both of them, Eir and Yesh, both of them, the Mitziyusam is not Mitzad Atzmo, because they don't create themselves. They're both created entities. But when it comes to Eir and Ruchnis, he says, Kiyumim Mitzad Atzme. If you remember, we explained it at length, that it has inherent value once it exists. Why? Because it's bittul to alikus. A yesh doesn't have any inherent value. All it is a created entity. Eir, because it's bottle and its whole being is the identity of its source, that gives it itself, therefore, is in a state, has a certain inherent value. Obviously, its mitzias is not in its own, but that inherent value is there. So you could say it's very. The Frierdiker Rebbe elaborated on that. The Rebbe Rashab just said one half a line on the topic. But by saying this now, you could see that Eir, even though on its own, it does not have the properties that tells us what Atzmus is like. Built to Mitzias Nimtza, Mitzias Atzmusei, Mechuyev HaMitzias. That Eir on its own does not tell us, unless the Yesh, it's only because we see a Yesh, that's when Eir recognizes that. On the other hand, however, Eir has that quality that has something similar to Atzmus, not the Atzmus of Atzmus, but the revealing aspect. It's completely dedicated to revealing what Atzmus wants to reveal. That bittul, that's what it has. The Yesh does not have bittul. The Eir has bittul. And the bittul gives it a lot of power because it's, of course, the power that's coming from Atzmus. The Yesh has the power of being a creation from Atzmus. And the Eir has the bittul, its reflection of Atzmus. Now, again, 1 second. Again, just to make the point, drive the point home. The Eir is just a revealing force. That's all it is. So on its own, it would be like, I want to just conclude with an example I gave yesterday, just elaborate a bit more. So if you saw, let's say, a great tzaddik, the Moshe Rabbeinu, or you saw the Rebbe, and you're a scholar, a person who's completely dedicated to the Rebbe's teachings and his directives, and your whole life is bottled to whatever the Rebbe wants. Okay, then suddenly you see the Rebbe has an impact on a person that doesn't understand the Rebbe, is not dedicated to him, is not doing anything that reflects what the Rebbe wants. But you see a certain kiruv. You see the Rebbe has an influence on him. And he's drawn to the Rebbe. And you ask yourself, what's he being drawn to? He doesn't have the scholarship, doesn't have the Aveda, doesn't have the bittel. So you suddenly recognize, you know what? There's more to the Rebbe than just his scholarship and his Aveda and all the Giluyim that I know about. And who revealed that for you? Only the Ish Pashut. Only someone that was completely not in this category. Someone you would never imagine that the Rebbe has a relationship with, because there's nothing in common about them. So now, you, the Chassid, who's completely bottled, which of course is the example for Ur, reflecting and so on, suddenly realize, 1 second, the one I'm reflecting, the Rebbe in other words here, the Atzmi, is far beyond anything I reflect, because I see his relationship with something that's completely not like us, nothing like the Rebbe's teachings or the Rebbe's directives or the Rebbe's environment. That's like the Yesh. So the Yesh, it's very being a foreign element that doesn't indicate on a source, that doesn't have any Giluyim in it on its own. Tells you that the Creator has something that's beyond Ur. Now, Ur, being bottle, appreciates that. So now it reveals that as well. Once there's a Yesh, the Ur will tell you, okay, now we know things about Atzmus that I would never have been able to tell you on my own. And how did I learn it? Because I saw how Atzmus has an impact on a reality that's completely outside of my domain. So you'll say, okay, so which one is better? The answer is you need both. Ur's role is to reveal and to make it something you can relate to. And the Yesh's role is to actually express a power of Atzmus that only a Yesh can express.
In a sense, he's revealing like an Or himself.
No, there's no Ur, it wouldn't reveal. If you didn't have Ur, the Yesh would be a created Yesh, but we would have no mind, and we have no way of understanding and revealing it. No, it would be just like a stone. A stone created to be a stone. The mere fact that we can talk about it means that there's Ur involved. Because Seichel and conversation that we're discussing is called Ur. It's not. The Ur is talking about the Yesh when we talk about it. Because the Yesh is precisely that. It's a Yesh HaNivra, Ein La'ila V'Sibah. It has nothing to reveal. It's like I just said, it's a product of Atzmus. It's not a revealer of Atzmus.
Only revealing to the Or, though, itself. In itself, it's not a competition. It's Ur Ein Sof. This is Ur that comes from Atzmus, that through the Ur, God created the Yesh. So Ur is not some bystander here. Mm-hmm. But the properties of Ur will not tell it to you on its own. It's like the example I gave yesterday. Torah, Ur, reveals the power of mitzvahs and the power of tshuva that Torah itself on its own doesn't have that. But it reveals it because that's the only place you learn about it. How do you know that tshuva is greater than a tzaddik? Al tshuva greater than a tzaddik, or a mitzvah action is more powerful than learning? The learning itself tells that to you. Talmud Gadol Shemevil de Maisa. The Talmud tells you that the Maisa has something greater than the Talmud has. Gotcha.
Okay. Bottom line is, without you have no ishtalshlus, and you don't have anything.
But the Or Ein Sof is also not revealing the whole Atzmus, right? Even the Or Ein Sof, it's revealed.
Doesn't reveal anything of Atzmus, frankly, unless there are things that Atzmus creates that helps to reveal. On the other hand, by the way, the Yesh is also Shalei Berach. The Yesh is telling us that Atzmus is Mitzusim Atzmuse. But we said, remember, even Beira does not describe all of Atzmus. It describes something that only Atzmus has, but not all of Atzmus. Nothing describes all of Atzmus. That I can tell you right now.
Only Atzmus is Atzmus. But the Yesh it helps us understand the personality of the uniqueness of Atzmus, and the Eir is the actual understanding and the revelation of it. Now, because of Eir's Bittel, one second, because of the Bittel of Eir, Bittel allows Eir to assume properties that are beyond itself. Remember, going back to the mashal with the chassid is completely mukusher and bottle and dovuk to the Rebbe, to his Rebbe, because of his dveikus, he's going to appreciate things that he would never appreciate on his own. Because if he was a Metzias, he'd say, I have no relationship with this Ish Pashat. Why would I dance with him on Simchas Torah? He's not in my league. I'm a scholar. He's a simple person. But because he's bottled to the source and he sees the source created that entity and relates to that entity, so that Bittul will carry Eir to places it would never go to, so to speak, due to its own personality. If you can call it its own personality. Obviously, it's not called personality because we said the Eir is Ayin Beis, is ultimately complete Bittul. But that Bittul has a pact. But from the point of view of awareness, essentially, if you ask the question, would Eir be aware of the power of Atzmus to create a Yesh? I mean, the answer would be that Eir doesn't have awareness. Once there's a creation, then the Eir is obviously part of this process. It's hard to talk about because we're not on the level of Eir. We're in the level of Yesh. But it's a Yesh that's been shaped and formed, and there's Eir everywhere. It's just concealed Eir. Remember, even Koyach HaPoel Benifel, which ultimately carries that Eir into the creation. Because that's the ultimate point, that it creates, even that Eir ultimately is also part of who we are, just concealed. So when we start through Aveda, discovering the Ayin within the Yesh, Hanivra, we learn more and more. That's the revelation of the Ayin, the Gili HaAyin, the Gili HaEir, the Gili HaEir in a dark Yesh. That's the whole purpose. And as the more you learn about it, the more you realize the levels of Bittul. That's what we're discussing now. So right now we're talking about the lower level of Bittul, which is Heder Tfisa Smokim. But we're still not finished with this subject. I can assure you right now this, you're not going to get it from one conversation. This can require a good few, sometimes years, if not maybe less. It takes a lot of time to fully understand, because if you're going to try to understand it mechanically, which I see you're trying to do, processing, it's not going to really work. You're not going to figure it out like an auto mechanic, which pipe is which, the pipe of Eir, the pipe of Yesh, because it's not pipes. These are archetypes. These are properties. You have to find examples in your own life if you're going to want to relate to this, or else it's just going to remain a very abstract idea.
It's one of the
Wouldn't be more appropriate to say the Rebbe Yatz instead of the Friedrich Rebbe?
I didn't hear your
Somebody
question.
told me it's not big. Somebody told me that to say the Rebbe Yatz is more appropriate instead of saying the Friedrich Rebbe. Makes sense?
He can do whatever he wants.
No, because the Friedrich Rebbe is less respectful.
I don't know. We Chassidim always use the word Friedrich Rebbe. It doesn't.
Okay.
I don't see. I mean, I don't find it less respectful. Friedrich Rebbe means the Rebbe before our Rebbe. That's what it means. The Rebbe didn't use either. The Rebbe used the Rebbe the Shver. Now, obviously, we can't say that because it's not our Shver. The Nesi Dareinu.
Since you mentioned that some people are saying it's not appropriate to say Nesi Dareinu about the Rebbe because he used it about the Friedrich Rebbe. Is this making sense?
Who are these some people? What authority do they have?
Okay.
I don't see any problem using the Sidarein on the Rebbe. Why not? This Nasi Adar. I mean, first of all, what does the Rebbe mean by Nasi Darein? And how about saying Mitler Rebbe? Is that respectful? And that is an expression that Rabbeim used. They called him the Mittler Rebbe. Why is Mittler Rebbe better than Friedrich?
Besides, this is a different door.
I'm saying, what's wrong with Mittler Rebbe? Because in the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, they called the Tzemach Tzedek the Rebbe. They called the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, and the Mittler Rebbe, and it stuck. Now the Mittler Rebbe is no longer the middle Rebbe. He's the second Rebbe. But we call him the Mittler Rebbe. The Rebbe always used Mittler Rebbe. It's a toyad. I don't know if we know whether it's. I mean, if these same people, they didn't know better, they'd say Alter Rebbe is very insulting. Call him the old Rebbe, like he's like an old Rebbe. But he means the Alter Rebbe meant the Rebbe that was the grandfather of the Tzemach Tzedek. That's what it meant.
Some of us like.
Today, outside of the Rebbe Maharash.
Right?
Today, the Rebbe Maharash outside.
Correct. Yeah, the Rebbe Maharash.
And that's good because we're confronting, we're going right into, and instead of slipping under very hard concepts today. It's very good.
Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. Page 1156. Remember, the subject is not over yet. He's still going to explain now. V'yesh levayazeh. He's going to explain this. He didn't still answer the question how we could say headed tfisas mokim and eir legaba atzmus, not just eir legaba higher level of eir. He began giving us a taste of it, but right now he's going to explain what does this mean that its mitzias is equally infinitely distant, like yesh eir, that is, and yet it's hisavus, its manner of coming into being. Essentially, it's a creation. It's the process, the way it emanates is not the enarech. So it says ein ze bebchinas kiruv atzmus, b'kol mokim ein gam ken b'derech enarech. So you can't call it kiruv because obviously it's distant, just like yesh, but it's also not in the form of enarech. Since it's a revealing element, So the revealing aspect makes it somewhat have a relationship. But remember, it's not a relationship from Atzma's point of view. Because from Atzma's point of view, the Eid is completely, infinitely distant like a yesh. But the Eid, being that it reveals and being that it's attached, has a relationship. And we're going to learn soon, this is Heder Tfisas Makim. In the aspect of Gilui. You can basically say it's the Koyach HaGilui Sheba Atzmus that the Eir reveals. We'll talk about this more soon. Okay, V'yesh Levayazeh, and this can be explained, yes, we can explain this, Al derech mashn isbar le'il, be'inyan rotzen v'seichel. Al derech, similar to what was explained earlier by rotzen and seichel. So you may recall, rotzen and seichel, the Friedrich Rebbe had a long arichas on it. The Rebbe Rashab, I just want to find it for a moment. Where was rotzen and seichel? Was I think page 1148. Where was the Ratzna Seichel? Let me see in Tzadik Dalet, I know where it is. I'll find it in a minute. Here we are. Just a moment, please. I think it must be referring to either much earlier. I thought it was,
Volume 1, maybe even, no?
it could be, but he did refer to it earlier at the bottom of page 1147, and he referred to volume 1 there. I think that's what he's referring to. Okay, but regardless, so he says, that we'll understand this, al derech, similar to what was explained earlier, the Ratzon and Seichel. So remember that God created the human being and our faculties in a way that reflect and mirror the way the divine levels work. A long discussion about how from that is completely beyond even desire, comes the Ratzon HaKodum. The Ratzon HaKloli, first a Heskem, a consideration, a deliberation, a resolution, what do we say, a determination, and so on. So using examples from our faculties help us understand levels above. So Ratzon and Seichel, before we learn inside, has been a very operative structure that the Rebbe Rashab has addressed many times, all the way back, as you mentioned, volume 1, in explaining the difference between Makif and Pnimi, where Ratzon is Keser and Seichel is Chabad or Chochmah, and the difference between a Pnimisdika faculty that is localized, has a locale, the brain, the heart, the emotions, the eyes, the ears, and so on. Pnimi, an energy that's defined and enters into a container, while Ratzon signifies a transcendent energy. Doesn't have a locality. It is, in a sense, everywhere in the whole human being. The Ratzon, whether it's the Ratzon to walk or the Ratzon to talk or to write or to think or to use your mind or to use your emotions, it's a overriding force. And as such, it's much more reflective, the Ratzon of the Nefesh. The Nefesh wants something. That's all that Ratzon cares about. What it wants is the specifics. Like we discussed a number of times in the mitzvahs. There's two aspects. Every mitzvah has two sides to it. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu. That you sanctified and commanded us with this mitzvahs. That's an equalizer. You gave us, it's Ratzon Hashem. Whether it's Shabbos or Kashrus or Sukkot or Yom Kippur, Ratzon Hashem. And then what does the Ratzon consist of? Yom Kippur has its particular halachas. Sukkot has its particular halachas and parameters. So Ratzon is much more like, in a way, like the ayin of the Yesh Amiti. It reflects what God wants. And as such, it says, you don't distinguish between one mitzvah and another because they're all God's Ratzon. But then there's the other side of it where God wants the specific detail. And one mitzvah is not like another mitzvah. And you can't just say, what difference does it make? It makes a major difference. The Ratzon is dafka, that today you bring a carbon and tomorrow you don't bring the same carbon, you bring a different carbon. Or there's the Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos, etc. So bottom line is that is more the Giluyim, the Pnimi, that would be like more the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. The Ratzon as it relates to a specific desire. So what you have from this is both are coming from the Nefesh, the Ratzon and the Seichel, but they are different in how they express the Nefesh. And he's going to use this to explain the difference between Eir and Yesh, what he spoke about, whether it comes a Savas B'derech Kiruv Richuk Shlei Berech, not Shlei Berech. So we'll learn inside now. I just wanted to connect it to something we've been learning so often. It keeps coming up in Ayin Beis, because it's really the whole Ayin Beis, the interface. Keser is Ratzon, and the Keiches Pnimim, the Eres Pnimim is Pnimius. And you want the union, the fusion of Makif and Pnimi, which then leads you to a place that's beyond Makif and Pnimi. That's been between Bli Gvul and Gvul, if you wish. Transcendence and immanence. That's in general. That interface itself, we've learned many levels of it. But if you remember, in Kesed itself, we learned their levels. And in the Eretz Pnimim, there are levels. The spheres have the three meanings, and Kesed has the three levels. So everywhere, you have the levels, the interfaces everywhere, but in general, you could say Makif and Pnimi, Ratzon, and Seichel. Okay. The Ratzon Eine Chutz L'Atzmus HaNefesh. I'm reading inside now. Desire is not something you could say is outside of Atzmus HaNefesh. Why? Because all it is, when you say the word desire, you have to right away say who desires? The Nefesh. It's not something outside. We're talking about the Ratzon. Whether it's a Ratzon to walk, or to talk, or to throw a stone, or to learn Torah, all those actions are outside of Atzmus HaNefesh. But the Ratzon to do so is the first step. If you remember, that literally on the second page of Ayin Beis, volume 1, he said Ratzon is the first interface to anything. Because if you don't want something, nothing's going to happen. Even if you have all your faculties intact, you're not building a house if you don't have a Ratzon to build a house. So Ratzon is the first reflection of the Nefesh being drawn to something. So what he's saying now, the expression, it's not chutz la'atzmus hanefesh. Now, of course, I know you'll jump and say, 1 second, what do you mean it's not chutz? Ratzon is already a level. The atzmus hanefesh is not even ratzon. So hold on and be patient and we'll get there. The seichel hu koyach shu chutz la'atzmus hanefesh. Seichel, on the other hand, is a faculty that's outside of the atzmus hanefesh. Because seichel is not about reflecting what the nefesh wants. Seichel is a specific product of what the nefesh is capable of. It's a koyach hanefesh, but it's not a reflection of atzmus hanefesh. So you see already the similarity between Oyer and Yesh, if you start thinking about it. But we'll learn it inside. U'kamoy kein yuvan, being in mitzias ha-seichel v'haratzon. And similarly, we'll understand in the mitzias, in mitzias ha-seichel v'haratzon ha-keches atzum shalahem. Okay, this is a little more complicated now. Okay, first, let me just explain a little more before we read the next lines. I remember one of the examples I've been using a lot over the years in explaining was chief of staff versus head of particular departments. So Atzmus is like the melech that's beyond everybody. But then he has a chief of staff, which is going to be compared to Oyer, the highest levels of Oyer. They carry his orders. That's their job. The chief of staff is not involved in managing or micromanaging any department. The melech tells him, the leader tells him, chief of staff, today I want 10 things done. Like I said, Ratzon Hashem. We're not getting, the chief of staff doesn't care whether it's running the military or sending out the mail or cleaning up the garbage or going and collecting taxes. The chief of staff then goes to each head of the department and says, here are your orders. Each of them now is responsible for their particular function. The mail department is not the tax department. The agricultural department is not the foreign relations department. And each of them has under them a whole bunch of subordinates who fulfill and get it done, come back and report. Chief of staff comes back and reports to the king. Just as a muscle, it's just a muscle to make a little sense of all this. So from the chief, so here you have completely different type, they're all toward one end, but different functions. The chief of staff's job is just to convey without compromise the complete integrity of the leader's orders. Not to change it, not to adjust it, exactly what he says. The heads of the department take the message and they have to now delegate and figure out how are we going to get it done. And they have to deal with, let's say there's a problem. There's a storm. Can they deliver the mail that day? They have to figure it out. My point is that each has their fun. Ratzon's role is just to convey. We learned the word merutza. The Ratzon is an expression of it's being drawn to something. Ratzon from the word sinner, the same letters as sinner, a channel. But however you interpret it, bottom line is Ratzon is the closest thing to the nefesh expression. And from a Ratzon point of view, it makes no difference what the Ratzon is for. Obviously, it makes a difference in the kavanah. But I'm talking about in its functionality, it gives orders equally to every part of the body. Whether it's...
But it's not the etzem nefesh.
That's not the point we're talking about, however, here. He says it's not chutz la'atzmus hanefesh either, because it is reflective of the nefesh. The seichel, on the other hand, is a particular function. Seichel is already a department. Seichel, using your mind. So seichel is a koyach hanefesh, and rotzen is hamshachas hanefesh. Another way of putting it. So that's why he says rotzen is not atzmus hanefesh. Rotzen is einei chutz la'atzmus hanefesh, and seichel is chutz la'atzmus hanefesh because it's the nefesh as it's already manifesting in a particular faculty. But now he's going to go deeper into the root of where these remember even seichel also originates in the nefesh. Doesn't come from outside forces. Seichel is also one of the koiches, we call it koiches hanefesh. So he wants to discuss now that koyach in its deepest root as it emerges from the nefesh. So he says like this, what is koiches atzmim? As you may recall, the koiches themselves, the faculties have koiches geluyim. That's revealed faculties. I'm speaking right now. My seichel is expressed through my words. That's a koyach goli. You use your hands, your arms, your legs. Anything you're doing is a koyach goli. There's koiches nelamim. Koiches nelamim is like to say right now, you have the capacity to use your mind, you have the capacity to write, but you're not writing. So the koyach is there, the faculty is within is active. I'm sorry, the faculty is there, but it's not active in a revealed way. And there's levels of the koiches as they move from revealed to concealed. There's koiches hiyulim, and then there's koiches atzmim. Koyach atzmi is the root of the faculty that you have in the nefesh itself. So it's called koyach atzmi. Why? Because it's still, as the nefesh carries that, there's the nefesh neisa koiches. I'm not talking about that. It's how the koyach is in its root source before it goes through the stages. So koyches atzmi. So he's saying that we'll understand this difference between seichel and rotzen also in their from their koyches atzmim, from their root essential. They could say the quintessential, I don't say archetypal. I don't know. Archetypal is not the right word. The core essence of the faculties. So not only as the faculties function, there's a difference. Seichel is a specific function, a faculty, and rotzen is expressing what the nefesh wants. He's saying even on the atzmi level, even where the koyach is not yet a revealed, activated, actualized faculty, it also is a form of nivdal, because seichel is not a reflection of the nefesh. It's a reflection only of a certain aspect of the nefesh. If someone were to say, what is your soul like? And your answer would be, it's an intelligent soul, you wouldn't be giving an accurate answer. You could say your soul has the power of intelligence, but there's also emotions, and there's other faculties. So seichel is nivdal, meaning it comes from there, but it's a particular expression of the nefesh, whereas rotzen, though it's not etzem nefesh mamish, but it's an expression of the full nefesh, because your nefesh now wants this, and rotzen is applicable to all faculties. We learned this, as I said, at length in volume 1, approximately chapters 45, 50. Now in Tzadik Daled, we actually learned it inside, because he cited from there. If you want to look it up, let me just give you the pages here. Yeah. Actually, it's further. It's at chapter 64, 65. In Tzadik Daled, if you want more information on this, Go to page 52 and on. 52, yeah, through around 56. He spoke about this, what we're learning now. Not every detail, but yeah. Good. So going back to the chief of staff is not nivdal from the melech. Why? Because all his job is to just express what the melech wants. Is he the king? No, he's not the king. But his function is as close to the king as possible because he's expressing everything the king wants to express. Now, the things the king doesn't want to express, the Ratzon doesn't express, obviously. So we're not saying Ratzon is the Esem HaNefesh. We're saying Ratzon is not Chutz La'atzmus HaNefesh. Because whatever it does, it's only doing is expressing what the king wants. The heads of the department, which I compared to Seichel or Midas and so on, or Seichel in this case, is outside of, it's a faculty that comes from the Nefesh. But you cannot say all its job is to reflect what the Nefesh wants. No, it's a particular, it's actually the product of the Nefesh, whereas the Ratzon is like the producer. The producer expresses himself through the orders he gives, which is Ratzon, and then the product, and Seichel is the first and primary product of the Nefesh, first of the faculties. So he says the same thing is also in Atzmus, in the Keiches Atzmim, that Seichel, even in its root, it's not similar to Ratzon. Not only in its expression, even in Keich Atzmi, it's in the form of a nivdal, meaning something separate of. Though it's coming from the Nefesh, but it's separate in the sense that it's a particular expression as opposed to a reflection of the Nefesh as is Ratzon. Tehina Yedua, because now it's known that Sichlim Hanimshachim B'derech Eir Yosher, that the Sichlim, the intelligence, the ideas, Hanimshachim that are transmitted B'derech Eir Yosher. Now let me explain before we continue. The difference between Eir Yosher and Eir Chezer in this context is Seichel that's coming from your mind. Your mind is generating ideas. Eir Chezer would be Seichel that's being generated by your student who's asking questions, or learning Talmud Bavli, let's say, where you're seeing arguments back and forth and it's coming back to you. So if you were to speak your own intelligence without anyone else intervening, would be Eir Yosher. What do you generate? You're sitting down, you learn, your mind is functioning. That's called Eir Yosher. Eir Chezer is you share it with someone else, and that person asks you a question or challenges you, or you need to explain it further. That's already the Eir Chezer coming from the Makabel. That's like Metalmidei Yeshem Mekulam. For my students, I learn most because my students brought back an Eir Chezer, so it elicits from your mind ideas you yourself would not initially have come to. That's what's relevant here as far as Eir Yosher and Eir Chezer. We're going to see the relevance of discussion in a minute.
Is that the way we used the two terms before? We had a slight, I don't really remember exactly, but we had a different take on them before, didn't we?
Eir Yosher, Eir Chezer is a whole subject matter. There's a lot of takes on it. We're talking now this specific aspect he's talking here. I mean, you want to show me something, sometimes it may relate to it, sometimes it may not. I mean, we learned about Makif of Eir Yosher and Makif of Eir Chezer. What are you referring to specifically?
As I just said, I don't remember, but I know we had a different take on it.
And trust me, Chassidus, if you made an encyclopedic entry, Eir Yosher, Eir Chezer would be 100 pages. There's a lot on any topic. Right now, he's addressing this. So, yeah, Eir Yosher, Eir Chezer. Usually, Eir Yosher, Eir Chezer, another example is the sun and the moon. The moon is refracted light from the sun. The sun the sun light originates from the sun. The emanate, mashpia makabel, basically. Eira mashpia, eira makabel is Eir Chezer, Eir Yosher, Eir Chezer. But in context of what we're discussing here, let's see what he's saying. So he says the sichlim, the ideas that are drawn, b'derech Eir Yosher, hein mekeich ha'maskel shebenefesh. So he's going to give us the process of how a faculty, seichel, in contrast to Ratzon, how does that emerge? Where does it come from? So the nefesh is a living entity. Let's just begin with that. Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim, nefesh chayim, a living soul. It's energy. It has in it, not just energy, it has many forces. It has the ability, and we know there are 10 faculties, like he says in Tanya in the beginning, that come from the 10 spheres. These 10 faculties are koiches hanefesh. So he's explaining. So when you're sitting and your mind is generating ideas, you're conceiving and initiating and generating ideas. Where are they coming from? They're coming from a thing called the koyach hamaskel shebenefesh. The nefesh, just like the soul, if you cut open a body, God forbid, you're not going to find a soul sitting there. If you cut open a soul, you're not going to find seichel in there. So you call it koyach hamaskel shebenefesh. That the nefesh has a koyach called koyach hamaskel, the power to conceive. Now God could have created a nefesh without a koyach hamaskel. For example, a stone has also a nefesh hadememes, the language of the Arizal. It has a soul. It has a spirit called a mineral spirit. It has a divine force that's sustaining and energizing a stone. But it doesn't have a koyach hamaskel, because that nefesh does not need a koyach hamaskel. The human being created in the divine image. That's why it says the koyches hanefesh ishtalshlu mehen. We were created with faculties that reflect the divine attributes. So chokhmah bina das in Atzilus is reflected in our seichel. Where does chokhmah bina das come from? What's the koyach hamaskel lamayla? Moiches timah or chokhmah timah. That is the equivalent of the koyach hamaskel in the human being. Is chokhmah timah, super consciousness in the divine. So essentially, koyach hamaskel is the level like similar to originating in Keser, but it's not Ratzon, it's the koyach hamaskel. It's the chokhmah shebezeh. But koyach hamaskel on its own is just a potential, it's just like a fountain that's not yet giving off its waters. It's like a reservoir of, think of it like an engine that has the power to conceive, but you have to do something to conceive ideas. So the koyach hamaskel can sit and be dormant for years. I mean, not completely, because a person is machshava mishetet tamid. The thoughts are always, it's like a wheel that's always turning. But we're talking about in a serious way to conceive ideas. You have to sit down and make an effort. So the koyach hamaskel is like, you could take the collective unconscious, in a way you can call it as well, or the collective supraconscious, if you wish. So the sichlim b'derech yosha come from the koyach hamaskel shebenefesh. Shezeu ma shenimshach min hanefesh liyez b'bchinas moker l'seichel. This is a very key thing. Now, we've learned this a number of times, so it shouldn't be anything new, but still, we haven't learned it for a while, so I'm explaining. This is what it means, that from the nefesh, something is being drawn out from the nefesh to become a moker to seichel. So koyach hamaskel is not seichel, it's the moker a seichel. Koyach hamaskel, the power to conceive. Now we understand if there's an idea that comes to you right now, some idea that you just generated or conceived, it came from somewhere. It didn't come from nowhere. And so where do we say it came from? Koyach hamaskel. The power of maskil within the nefesh.
So it's not chutz. In this case, the koyach hamaskel is not chutz.
How do you know? We're going to see. He didn't finish the subject.
It's like that's what you just said.
I would not draw any conclusions.
Okay.
You'll be surprised what he's going to say. V'hu, and this koyach hamaskel is b'bchinas hamshacha nelemes. It's called hamshacha nelemes, a concealed hamshacha. Now, do any of you have good memories from around 6 years ago? Well, we learned about it at length in volume 1. I have to look up the chapter. It's approximately it's in the hundreds. I don't remember which chapter, but I have to look it up. But it was a whole discussion. Hamshach and Elemis. It actually originates from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim. I think in Imre Bina he said there. Hamshach and Elemis means it's Hamshacha, but it's not revealed. It's concealed. The Hainu Mashakfad Nimshach Ma Nefesh. It's already been transmitted from the Nefesh. It's not just sitting there completely beyond. Liyas Mokir. So it's become somewhat of a source. It would be like, for example, God created the world and he implanted Tahemis, a Tahim. How do we translate a Tahim? The Tahemis. There's a Tahim, a Mayon, and a Nahar. So a Mayon is a spring of water, of living water. It comes from the Tahim. The Tahim are the deep-rooted arteries in the earth from where water originates. Science talks about it as well. And a Nahar is like the river is when you draw the water in a revealed way. So if you wanted to put it into three levels, you could say...
Tehoim is not the source for water. Tehoim is
not al pnei Tahim. No, I'm talking about the Tahemis Mayim. No, not al Tahim means there, the Wirklichkeit. There means all of existence. When you talk about the Cheshach in the beginning, what's the Lashon now?
The Cheshach al pnei Tehoim.
No, Tahim there means existence. I'm talking about Tahemis Rabim, the expression Tahim as the source of water. That's a different meaning. It has maybe some similarity, but the Tahemis, there's an English word for it. I can't.
Tehoimois yechasiumu in Shiras, in the Shir or Oz Yoshir. Maybe there it's water. Tehoimois yechasiumu.
But there are other places that Tahim is used as the source of water under the ground, the deepest sources. My point I want to make is that even before
when it wasn't the fish, he said Tehoim yesay.
Anyway, I'm not looking for every place. I'm talking about Tahim from the word, the root of water, the source of water. That's the Tahim I'm referring to here. Okay. So you can create a world where you have hidden springs in the ground, and yet they're not yet been drawn in the revealed way. Even right now. I don't know if any of you, I remember when I was a kid in 1968, 67, I should say, when the Rebbe used to walk Tashlich, Rosh Hashanah, to botanical gardens. In 1967, they decided, you know what? They're going to find live living water near 770. And I remember they brought this big machine that was like a drill, and they drilled and drilled. They had to go very deep down because there were rocks. It was a whole complication. But they finally found water, and that became the Tashlich, which we use since then. The first year was Tavshin Chav Ches, Rosh Hashanah 67. So the water was there sitting there. My point I want to make is that it's already nimshach. You can't say it's not there, but you call it hamshach and nelemis because it's not created yeshmai. It's already came out of the nefesh in the sense it's already a koyach hamaskil. It's a power to conceive, but it's still concealed. And then comes the next stage when you draw from it, and then it becomes from helem to gili. So what he's saying here is that the way seichel works yashar is it comes from the koyach hamaskil, it's nimshach and becomes a mocker, and it's hamshach and the hainu mashakfa nimshach ma nefesh liyas mocker rakshu behelam adayin, but it's still concealed. Umemenu nimshach kol hagiluyim de seichel v'schakmus bedover ma, and from there will be drawn all the giluyim, all the revelations of intelligence and conceiving and conceptions and everything that seichel will, any type of ideas will all come from this wellspring of koyach hamaskil. V'hu hanikra mazel machkim. This is called the mazel that's machkim. A mazel that makes you intelligent. It's a mazel. Mazel means it's a level. It's not revealed, but it is the source that from which seichel is drawn from. Keneda.
Lashon noizel.
Right. Flowing. Now he goes, I'll just read one more line because it's already 10:35. Now he's going deeper. Koyach hamaskil is a koyach. However, it's a concealed faculty. Like I said, koyach is hanalomim. But there's something deeper than that. The koyach hamasechel hayuli. This is not even a wellspring yet. That's concealed. This is the power, the potential power of intelligence in the soul. Ha'atzmi. The koyach hasechel hayuli ha'atzmi, which means even beyond this hidden wellspring, hanatua umushresh be'etzem hanefesh. That's embedded or ingrained. Hanatua is like implanted. Umushresh and rooted in the etzem, in the core of the nefesh. Eina b'bchinas hamshacha klal. This is not even hamshacha nelemes. You can't even call it any hamshacha. It's the nefesh has a power that will become a koyach hamaskil, which in turn will become seichel goli. The eina begeder moker l'seichel. You can't call this even moker, a source for seichel. Koyach hamaskil, you could say, is a concealed superconscious state, but it's there. And now it's a matter of drawing from it all the intelligence. The seichel hayuli be'etzem atzmi seichel, what he calls seichel hayuli atzmi, is not even that state of a source. Okay, I'd love to continue here, but we have to stop.
Just read one half a line more.
I don't want to read another half a line because it goes into Chezer and it's going to make things very complicated. I know.
No,
what
he said that this is not Torah Yuli. The Chezer and Torah Yuli. Don't explain it.
I just said, the Eina begeder moker l'seichel. I read till that line. I'm stopping before Ach Koyach Chezer. I'm stopping before the line Ach Koyach Chezer because that's needs more explanation. It's not a quick read. Okay. So let's stop here, middle of page 1156. You can read on if you like. I'm just saying, for me to go read is now you have to explain the next 5 lines. Okay.
Reb Simon, there is a fear tomorrow?
No, because I'm traveling tomorrow. So no shir tomorrow. I'll put it on the group. There's no shir tomorrow. The question now is, when should be the next shir?
Why not Monday? I know you're in California, but maybe 10:30, which is by you 7:30. I don't know.
The time is not an issue for me. 6:30 I could also do.
9:30 is best for me. You're not going to have Simchas Beis Sheva like they did last year, so there's not much reason to stay up late.